Hi everyone, so welcome to this video which is all about the Azure CLI and the Azure Cloud Shell. The first section though will just be about the command line because I thought it was worth sharing some tips and tricks and also showing some fantastic tools that will give you a better command line experience. But first though, I just want to say a big thank you to both Gregor and Richard for sorting out the Azure Advent Calendar. It's such an amazing initiative. I'm currently recording this on the 13th of December. Friday the 13th of December, so not the best day to be recording this, but we're halfway through December, and if you look at all the videos that have been published already, so many different topics in Azure, just amazing, so a huge thank you to Gregor and Richard. So before we start, I should really introduce myself. So my name is Dan Clarke. I'm a contractor working through my own limited company, Everstat Limited. I specialise in .NET and Azure technologies. I also co-run two user groups, .NET Oxford and Azure Oxford. So .NET Oxford has been around for about 3 years. We have monthly meetups and it's grown into a fantastic community in the Oxfordshire area in the UK. And Azure Oxford has been around for about 5 months. We've had 5 meetups so far, and again this is growing in the same light. So both meetups has been a fantastic experience. It's got me into public speaking, something I never thought I would say, and it's just amazing to what a fantastic community both .NET and Azure has. I also have a blog, danclarke.com, so I will do quite an in-depth blog post covering everything I cover in this video in that blog post. So if you prefer to read rather than watch videos, then that's available too. And also this year I got awarded the Microsoft MVP award, mainly through the stuff I've done in the community through .NET Oxford and Azure Oxford, but I was not expecting that, so that's just such a huge honour, so a big thank you to everyone that nominated me. Okay, so let's move on to the talk. So why use the command line at all? Well, it's all about choosing the right tool for the right job. I never say to purely use the command line and not use GUIs, but I'd also never say just to use GUIs and not use the command line. For a lot of tasks, GUIs are far more intuitive and productive, but there are also a lot of tasks where the command line is much more productive, especially when it comes to repetitive tasks. Also think about the automation benefits you get from being able to write Bash or PowerShell scripts. Whilst you write those in an editor, not in the command line, if you don't know how to use the command line, then it's unlikely you're going to know how to write those scripts. Also, a lot of modern technologies use the command line. If you think about Docker and Kubernetes, those are command line first. You interact with your Docker containers and images via the Docker CLI. You interact with your Kubernetes cluster via the kubectl command line. Front-end technologies like NPM, Angular and many more use command line tools. .NET Core, I find it much faster to use the .NET CLI to add new projects to solutions, to add NuGet packages, to create new projects, and also, of course, the Azure CLI, which we'll talk about shortly. So now let's take a look at some tools. So I hope Microsoft don't mind me saying this, but in the past, the command line experience in Windows hasn't been great. And I'm not talking about the shell itself, like PowerShell or CMD, but I'm more talking about the Windows management. So things like multiple tabs, split screen, even copy and paste. It wasn't that long ago before you had to right click, choose a submenu and choose Mark just to copy something to the clipboard. But now they're making big improvements. There's a new open source tool called the Windows Terminal, which I'll talk about very soon. But for the past few years, I've been using a tool called ConMU and also another tool called Commander, which they're pretty much the same thing. ConMU is an open source project and it's highly customizable, and Commander, they basically customized it and shipped it as a separate product. So lots of people just default to installing Commander initially, and this supports all the things I mentioned earlier, things like split screen, multiple tab support. You can do translucency, you can customize it a lot. But a few weeks ago I moved over to this Windows Terminal, this new open source Microsoft product. And to be honest, I absolutely love it. I've been using it as my main console now. They're iterating on it all the time, making improvements, and they've even made a video advertising it. And this is the most insane video I've ever seen to advertise a command line tool. So I hope you don't mind, but I thought I would show it here.
Style. I know you know, I know how to run wild. taking over the spotlight. I'm on a roll, ready for the show now. It's go time. Watch what I do. Watch what I do. I see you looking. Watch what I do. Oh my, my. Oh my, my. Watch what I do.
That is such a cool video. I just can't stop watching it. I saw that last week when Stuart Leeks did a talk at Donald Oxford about WSL2. That's actually been recorded, so I'll make sure I include a link to that in the blog post. Okay, so this is Windows Terminal. And if we look here, we've got a drop down. So you can choose, I default to Windows PowerShell, but you can choose between CMD, PowerShell, Azure Cloud Shell, which we'll talk about shortly, PowerShell Core and Ubuntu, so that's WSL. We've also got settings, so if I click on settings, then it opens a JSON file. So there's no GUI at the moment for settings, but you can see we've got a profile for each of the different shells we saw. So PowerShell, CMD, Cloud Shell, and you can set various settings. Windows Terminal actually comes with the Cascadia code font, which is a new font from Microsoft, and I absolutely love this. You can download it separately, you don't have to use the Windows Terminal, but I'm using this across all my terminals and all my IDEs and editors. And then you've got various other settings, so you can set translucency or acrylic. In fact, this is, if I show this and then move over, I can then scroll a bit. So you can start to see that effect, but to be honest, I prefer not having that. But it's really customizable. So quickly, before we move over to the Azure CLI, I just wanted to cover a few little command line tips and tricks. I love this comic strip. So whilst obviously it's the joke, you wouldn't be doing all this for the ls command, it raises a valid point. You do quite often retype the same commands on the command line, and lots of commands have lots of different arguments. You really want a command that can search back through the history of your past commands you've already typed. And this is where Control R comes in. By typing Control R, this enters reverse search history mode, and I can start typing a substring of a command I know I've typed before. So if I type apply, you can see that it's found a previous command that I've written before, and I might have written this command months ago, or it might have been 5 minutes ago. And if I want to search for the next one, Control R again, and I can keep on doing this until I've found the one I want. So that can save an awful lot of time. Some other shortcuts: if you're in PowerShell, you can press Escape to clear the line. If you're on Bash, you can press Control U to clear the line. For both Bash and PowerShell, Control L clears the screen. Another useful shortcut is if we do, for example, make directory some long directory name. Both Bash and PowerShell, if you do Alt period, then that copies the last word from the last command. So I could do CD Alt period. So that's quite useful. Another tip is to use auto-completion for tabs. So for example, say I've got my application.web. So say I've got a few directories, my application.web, my application.api, and a few different things. You can start typing wildcards, and then when you do tab, it intelligently works that out. So it's definitely worth using tab for various auto-completion scenarios. Another tip is to really try and get used to using piping commands. So both Bash and PowerShell support pipes. With Bash you're piping text output, with PowerShell you're piping the actual objects. So going back to that example before where we had make directory, we could have done make directory some long name and pipe it to the change directory command. So that's a very simple example. Another example might be if you've got lots of processes, and you can use wildcards to find a certain process. If you need to get rid of it, you can see that by using these piping, there's lots of scenarios where you can pipe one command to the other where that might be quite useful. Another really useful command is, and say for example, we'll see this command very shortly when we start talking about the Azure CLI. You can pipe to the clip command. And I use this a lot because it's very useful to be able to just copy some output to the clipboard to use in another application. So I'm really sorry that the video has gone on for so long without even touching upon Azure, but I thought it was worth covering some tips and tricks and fundamentals about using the command line and ways to get more out of the Windows command line. Okay, so let's move on to the Azure CLI. So if you Google for the Azure CLI, one of the first results you get is this page. So we've got install on Windows, install on Mac, and install on Linux, and you can even run this on a Docker container. So if we go to Windows, you've got an MSI you can download and install. For the Mac, you've got a brew command, so it's a one-liner to install it. And for Linux, you've got the various different apt-get or yum commands to install it as a one-liner. So it's really too easy to install. Okay, so now we've installed the Azure CLI. If you open up a command prompt, we can now type the AZ command. And this will list out various commands to get you started. So we can app service, cognitive services, Cosmos DB, VMs, web app, that kind of thing. But before we start looking at these commands, the first thing you need to do is actually log in and authenticate with your Azure account. And this is as simple as typing AZ login. And what this will do, this will redirect you to the browser. You can log into your Microsoft account, and then it tells you that you can close this tab, and we're now logged in, and we've got a list of subscriptions. So you can now choose your current subscription. So we could do AZ account. So account is subscription, set subscription, and then give it a name. So if we go with the so that's now set. That is the current subscription that I'm now working with. So in this talk, I obviously don't have time to go through every single command because there's a lot of commands there. So my aim in this talk is to show you how to discover the commands yourself. So we've already seen that if you do AZ, we've got a list. This is a good starting point. But say we wanted to look at web app. If you type AZ web app, you can do -H. And the help you get is in the context of what you've typed so far. So we can see we've got more commands like browse, create, delete, list. So if we now do create and do -H again, then the help is in the context of what we've already typed. So you can really drill down and get more information depending on what you want to do. And a lot of the commands follow the same format. So we've got AZ, some noun, and then a verb, so describing what you want to do to that noun. Another thing you'll see is a lot of these arguments follow quite a similar convention that a lot of CLI tools use, where you've got 2 hyphens with a long name, or a shorter version, a shorthand version with a single hyphen. So that's quite consistent with other tools like Kubernetes, the kubectl command line, and various others. So if we take one of those commands that we saw before, so this is just listing out our web apps. By default, the output is quite verbose JSON. And more often than not, this isn't what you want. So what you can do, you can say output table. And this will output a much more readable table format. I personally prefer this as the default. So what you can do, you can edit this file in your user folder called config. So user folder.azure.config. And if you add this line, so output equals table, that changes the default. So now we don't need this output table. And if you do want the more verbose JSON, you can do output JSON. Another thing you can do is filter down your search results. Now, I knew this existed, but I didn't realise it was called James Path until someone I know called James World told me this last week, and I assumed he was joking because his name was James, but it turns out he wasn't. And there's a whole website dedicated to this James Path. But if we type AZ web app list -h, we even get an example of this down here. So if I just copy this example, so you can see this is drilled down into the JSON, and we can add to this. So if we do name, so you can really customize this output to show just what you want to see. Another interesting way of exploring the Azure CLI is using something called interactive mode. Now, there are better ways of doing this, which I'll show shortly, but I thought I'd show this for completeness. So if you type AZ interactive, it goes into this weird command line GUI thing. So, and we can start typing commands and get IntelliSense. So you don't need, when you're in this mode, you don't have to type the AZ command. You can just type, say, web app, and you can see we've got IntelliSense already. Then it tells us what the next thing to type. So if we do create, for example, and then you can see we're getting this help. So you can see some of the arguments are required, some aren't. This is showing the long name. Do you remember with the double hyphen? If I do a single hyphen, it shows the short versions. And then if I type another one, it shows the long version. And that's what I can do name my web app. I'll give it a resource group. Etc. You get the idea. I won't actually create a web app now, but you get the idea. So it gives you IntelliSense and help. So I mentioned there was a better way to get IntelliSense, and well, there's a few different ways. One way is by using VS Code. So there's an extension called Azure CLI Tools. You can find it quite easily by searching Azure CLI, and it's one of the first results. Once this is installed, you can create a file with the AZ CLI extension. Or if it's a new file that you've not saved yet, you can just change the current file type. Once you do this, you can start typing these commands, and you then get this IntelliSense. And you even get IntelliSense with things like the location. So if you can't remember the location names, you can just start typing them. So you can see this is almost writing itself. So very quickly we've written a script which creates a resource group, creates an app service plan in that resource group, and then creates a web app in that app service plan. Let's now take a look at the Azure Cloud Shell. So here's the Azure portal, portal.azure.com. If we choose this icon here, Cloud Shell, then we get a command line in the browser, which is pretty cool. If this is the first time you've run the Azure Cloud Shell, you'd be prompted to create some storage, but once you've done that, you won't be prompted again. And here we have Bash and PowerShell, so you can choose your shell of choice. You can choose text size, font. Now unfortunately this doesn't have Cascadia code, hopefully they'll add this soon. You can upload and download files, and you've also got this icon, which is VS Code in your browser in Azure Cloud Shell, which is pretty cool. So you can edit your files. You can also just type code from the command line. just like you would locally. Now when using Cloud Shell you do get auto-completion. It's quite slow though. So I press tab to autocomplete there, create. You get the idea. If I double tab here now, then it lists out some of my resource groups. So you've got a very basic tab completion here. If we move back to the Windows terminal, then if you remember, one of these drop-downs was Azure Cloud Shell. If we click on this, the first time you do it, you will be asked to sign in. So we're given a URL to go to. We're also given a code. And then we sign into our Microsoft account and we're logged in. We can close this browser window now, go back to the terminal, and we're given a choice out of all our tenants. So I'm going to choose Everstack, which is my company. And now I'm prompted if I want to save those login details for the future. If I choose yes, then I won't be asked all these questions each time. And if I do an ls, we can see that I'm actually navigating the Azure file system, not my local file system. And we can do our usual commands and list out our web apps, or any other resources we want to list or interact with. I also wanted to show the Azure mobile application. This is on my Android phone. And we can use this app to browse resources. But if you look on the bottom right hand corner, there's this Cloud Shell button. If you click on this, this opens Cloud Shell on your mobile phone. So all the commands that we saw that we could type before, we can do from our mobile phone while on the move. So before we wrap up, one final bonus tool I wanted to show was a tool that Stuart Leeks told me about last week at .NET Oxford. And this is called AZ Browse, or AZ Browse, depending on where you're from. This is a tool written by Lawrence Gripper, and also looking at the contributor list, Stuart Leeks has actually written an awful lot of PRs in this. He's definitely sounded a big fan, and I've played around and I can understand why. So what this does, if we switch to the command line and I type AZ Browse, I'm also going to do -- demo because this hides some of my subscription IDs and various secrets. So this is kind of a GUI in the browser where I can then navigate my resources. It's got built in the VI keyboard shortcuts for up and down, or you can use the cursor key. I can go to my resource group, I can look into one of my web apps, I can look at some config, let's look at the web, and then I can do Control U to edit, and this will open my default editor, and I can actually change this, make some changes, save the file, and then this will update that service in Azure. So it's a really fantastic way to quickly browse through your subscriptions, your resource groups, and your various different resources. Okay, so that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please click the like button down below and share on social media, and any comments and feedback greatly appreciated. I'm Draken on Twitter, so that's probably the best way to get in touch, and thanks again.